Welcome to the Lifestyle Chase. This podcast features high performers who have found a way to live their best life while balancing their health, wellness, friends, and family. Proudly hosted by me, Chris Little. Without further ado, let's get started.
All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
So, welcome to the Lifestyle Chase, episode 45 with Geha, Gonthier. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing excellent. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have a nice visit and get to know you better. So, how does your day unfold? Like, what's a routine for you? Like, typical day-to-day routine. What do you do first thing in the morning?
First thing in the morning, before my feet even step out of the bed, I consider a whole bunch of things that I'm grateful for. Gratitude is a huge practice in my life. When I get up, I sit down and I meditate. After my meditation, I have lemon water, then either tea or coffee, then I exercise. So I do a lot of wellness related things in the morning. Sometimes I do qigong, sometimes I do weights, sometimes I do some yoga. That kind of depends day to day, but I do at least an hour each day self-care to start the day.
Nice. What would be your busiest day? What would the routine look like throughout the day after you start your morning?
Well, then I usually do some work. I have my own business, so I work quite a bit on the computer, just make sure that I'm caught up on everything and prepare for the day. I have my first meal, and then many times I see patients, and depending on the day, I can see patients until up to 8:30 in the evening, and then I would go home, relax, do my last qigong or yoga, and go to bed.
Nice. So a lot of people know where a person is in their life when they are at like their peak of success or when they are kind of in their full swing of things, but they never really know the backstory to a person. I want you to try to think back to maybe your years in high school or childhood, and like, what was that experience like? What was life like back then?
Well, I grew up in the 50s and 60s in Austria, and life was, first I was in a small town, and life was very different from what it is now. The values were very different. We lived a whole bunch of people in one family together, so it was not mother, father, child, it was grandparents and uncles. It was more like of an extended family all living together, and I loved going to school. I am, to this day, I'm a real nerd. If I learn and study continuously. This is something that has never stopped, and I was always incredibly curious, and I'm very grateful to my parents and my grandparents to have always encouraged that, because I love learning, and I love even being tested. I was one of those people that I would go, yes, I can prove how much I know. So that was always really interesting to me and really wonderful for me. And high school, we had already moved to Vienna, and Vienna was a very different environment, much more sophisticated and cultured. So I have a huge background, when it comes to theater and opera and classical music in general, and dance. I had always wanted to be a dancer. Now, my childhood, I was quite ill. I was always at the edge, a lot of the times. The medical establishment wasn't even quite sure if I was going to make it through. So my mother, throughout my childhood, got all sorts of interesting warnings about, well, we're not quite sure how she is going to survive this kind of a thing. So I grew up quite ill, so I was not really very strong in the body, so dancing was definitely out of my realm, but I loved moving, I loved dancing, and to this day that is one of my favorite things to do. When I come home in the evening, I put in some music and I just let it rip.
Nice, that's awesome. What was your first thing that you wanted to do when you're kind of going through like high school years? Like, what was your dream? What did you see yourself becoming?
Performer. I always thought I was going to be a performer. And I was for many years. And of course I wanted to be a dancer. But even studying dance and then moving to New York to continue my studies in dance, it was very clear that I did not have a chance in the professional realm of the world of dance at all. And I took some acting classes, and I spent many years acting, being on stage, doing commercials, doing small films or larger films, smaller roles in larger films, television, all sorts of things, but a while at the same time also studying Oriental medicine. And it's interesting because my focus was always performing and healing. Those two things always kind of came together. I did not have a word for that. Later on in life, I realized that there was something that people refer to as shaman, and that's what they do. They both are, in a way, the performers, and they're also the healers of a tribe. But that's a very ancient concept that we do not have anymore in these days. But that is something that has always attracted me, those two things.
Nice. So you talk about being sort of ill throughout childhood and stuff, and there's probably a lot of scenarios where people felt that you had no chance of doing things and you went ahead and did them anyways. What helped you to stay resilient in those times?
I would say my pure joy for life and my willpower, and I received a lot of support from my particularly mother and grandmother to just keep going. They always challenged me in the sweetest way.
Have there been times throughout your career, because you've gone and lived in many different places, done many different things, where you've overcome an obstacle that was that same degree of pushback?
Well, I think many times when I started from scratch, so to speak, and I started from scratch a few times in my life, like when I went to New York after university, and I went through university very quick. I was not even 22 years old, and I came to New York with $300 in my pocket, thinking this is going to last me for 6 months. Even in the late 70s, that was not a lot of money to survive without being able to work or anything like that, right? Just on a visitor's visa.
Yeah. So,
that was pretty challenging. Even coming to Canada 15 years ago, that was really challenging. I always was taken care of. There was always the helping hand. There was always the next person that helped me move on. And I was always inspired to make it work.
Yeah. That's incredibly relatable for me. I'm very youthful and still have a lot of life experiences ahead of me, but in my time in my career, there are tons of moments where I'm thinking how am I still making this happen? And it's cool to meet different people that experience that same thing. And I want you to reflect on your time in New York with that $300. What do you think it was that made it kind of work out? Was it something about you, what you did? Was it something about other people you surrounded yourself by? What do you think it was?
I think I gave myself no option to fail. Coming from Vienna and of course, it was the late 70s, it was Studio 54, it was party time in New York, and I jumped right into the party, and failing was simply not an option for me, even though I called at one point, I think I was down to 60 cents. So in New York, I didn't have a place to stay. I had paid for school, so that was cool. Yeah. But I couldn't take the subway or the bus. Because unlike in Europe, where you can kind of sneak in some of those things and hope that nobody's going to discover you, in New York you cannot do that. You have to pass through a place where you have to pay, in order to take public transport. So I was walking, and it was winter, and I slept in the school, covered behind the coats, and stayed up all night and partied, because I had a place there that was warm, and during the day I studied a little bit. I was in school and I danced, and then I went and hid out in the wardrobe and slept. So and I did give a collect call to one of my friends that I went to university with, and her boyfriend answered the phone, and he was so insulting to me and so abusive and so did not believe what I was going through, that when I hung up the phone, I said, I will not ask anybody for help. I'm just going to make this work. And somehow I did.
I think like the mindset, that whole like unstoppable kind of frame of mind that you had probably made a huge difference. What did you do for food? Like, how did you make it happen?
Well, there are advantages of being young, and I was pretty cute at that time, and that people always kind of took care of me. One of the places where I loved to hang out was a disco, which is what they would call a club in those days, on the Upper East Side in New York, and it was a gay club. And because I was kind of flamboyant, they loved me, and they kind of took care of me. They took me a little bit under their wing.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of a buffer until I found a job as a waitress, of course, under the books, right? And within a week, I had 3 jobs as waitresses. So, and what did I do for food? Yeah, people invited me, people took me here or there. I remember the last thing of food that I bought was a box of donuts.
Oh.
Because I knew, it was fairly inexpensive, and I had just enough money for that, and that's what I ate, and it was really disgusting. Even though, in my 20s, I still ate a lot of junk food, much more so than I do now. But still, I did not feel good after eating a whole box of donuts. But I somehow made it.
That's incredible. Aside from New York, you've lived so many other places. What are like the top 3 places that you lived in terms of like how that impacted your life, the memories that you have, some pivotal moment? Just try to think of the places that mean the most.
I think, well, in order to be, to have a little bit of a thread through it, I would say my most important place that I've lived was in Rajneeshpuram, in a commune. And recently there's a Netflix documentary that came out about that commune. And it was, looking at the documentary, it was actually very interesting for me because they brought a lot of perspectives that I had no clue on actually living there. Because living there, this was the most amazing place that I had ever lived. That I shared with so many people, so idealistic of the kind of impact, the kind of positive impact that we can make on the planet, and the kind of positive impact that we can make dealing with one another and how we behave with one another. It was a commune that was built around the teachings and the personality of a spiritual teacher called Bhagwan. Later he renamed himself as Osho. And at one point we were 5,000 people living there, and I was one of the people helping organize some of the big festivals that we had, and we had like up to 20,000 people come from all over the world. And it was a piece of land that we took that according to ecological reports of those days, supported 4.5 cows because the land was so incredibly eroded. And when we left after 5 years in Oregon, this was considered the most abundant wildlife area in all of Oregon. So rather than depleting the land, we nourished the land by what we planted, how we dealt with erosions, what it is that we did, how we recycled. I mean, it was so far ahead of its time, and there was so much joy within the people living there. Unfortunately, there was a lot of junk. There was a real dark side to it as well, right? Which is something that really comes across in that documentary. There was stuff in the leadership that was completely unacceptable, but for the people living there, including myself, that was not apparent. We lived, or at least I lived, a life of incredible harmony, and it showed me a way of interacting with other people, with other hearts, of making meditation and a heartfelt life the basis that informed every cell of my body to this very day.
And what brought you to that point? Like, what made you think, okay, this is my next step, I'm going to join this group and live in this place?
Well, it was interesting because I had found out about Bhagwan when I was actually on tour. And I had just gone on tour playing The Little Prince. I don't know if you know that book by Saint-Exupéry. Anyway, and there was a play that was made, and I played The Little Prince, and we went on tour. And I was so touched by his teachings. I felt so heard. I felt so seen that it was really, really important for me to go and check out that place. Because when I came back from tour, they had just, that piece of land was just purchased. And I wanted to go and see what was going on. So I did. And it touched me internally in such a deep place. I felt with every cell of my body that I needed to be part of this vision. And it still took me nearly 2 years before I actually moved there, because I had a whole bunch of other, things that I was doing and things that I was committed to, so I couldn't step up and go. And then I went, and I only went there for, I thought, okay, 3 months I'm gonna give myself and just see. And it was very clear after a month that there was no going back to New York and career, and it just didn't make any sense. The only thing really that made sense was to be a part of a group of people that lived in a way that I thought was appropriate for humanity to live like.
That's amazing. What's the second place or moment?
The second place, a place that I really, really loved and that was very precious for me to live in was Big Sur. I had lived with my husband in Carmel Valley, which is a very, very beautiful place in California, and that was beautiful. And then throughout my divorce and after my divorce, I lived in Big Sur, and that was here. I kind of fulfilled my fantasy of the Zen monk. I lived up on the hill in a very, very simple cabin. I didn't even have, I had plumbing in there. I had plumbed some cold water in there, but I never, I didn't have a toilet or anything like that. I had to either go outside into the woods or to my neighbor. Didn't have a shower. I had a hot plate, and I had a cabin that was leaking quite badly. So that was a very interesting, very rough, but also very healing time for me, to be up there by myself and living a life quite down to earth, very secluded, but I was basically with myself and got to process. Not that I was very successful. Looking back now, I know also how much I actually avoided by doing that. But at that time, that was a very important time for me. And it did inform me, because I also saw that doing things on my own, so to speak, by trying to figure everything out on my own without gaining perspective from the outside, is not always the ideal way of encountering yourself. Outside perspective is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the next things that I did after that is I went and lived on Maui, and that was glorious, and there I lived again in a commune, but much, much smaller. We were like sometimes as few as 3-4 people staying on that piece of land. But we basically built that piece of land from, again, nothing. It was an overgrown piece of jungle with a whole bunch of wild goats on it, and the realtor was like, oh yeah, a bunch of hippies that are going to come there and do whatever they're going to do. They're not going to last, right? But again, because we had all the people that were there that started that had come from the commune, from Osho's commune, so we had an idea of what it is that we wanted to do with the land. So we created an incredibly beautiful piece of land. And we were not quite as successful with our personal interactions always, but you know, it was this journey of how can we be in harmony with ourselves and with the land. And of course it was incredibly joyful to be right by the ocean, and basically jumping into the quite wild waters of the Pacific every day, and growing your own food, and having your hands and your feet in the dirt, and being barefoot. And you know, it was a time of great, great freedom, you know, chopping wood, carrying water. So it was, if there was something that I would say is my ideal comfort zone, I would say that was that. So from there is when I came to Canada, and that was a little bit of a challenge, because I started from scratch, because one of the things that, you know, living on Maui, I hardly made any money. You know, I lived on $2,000 a year.
That's crazy.
So, you know?
Yeah.
So, but again, you know, once food is taken care of, and I lived in a yurt, which again was a very beautiful way to live, because when you live in a round space without any electricity, because we were on solar, and in my yurt, I did not even have that. I chose actually not to. I didn't want to have any wires in there. I just wanted to live with candles, if that was necessary, or the moonlight or the starlight. And your eyes get pretty good with that if you live like that all the time. So coming here, where everything is square, everything's very cold and dry, it was a very different environment, and starting from scratch, because here you cannot just simply survive. You need shelter, you need clothes, you need to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
So, and again, so many things just fell into place so incredibly beautifully. And but still, it took me 3 years going back and forth before I was able to make the commitment and say, okay, I'm going to stay here.
Yeah. What was the moment where you realized you had to move on from Hawaii?
It was a tough moment, because I knew somewhere, even though I didn't want to know, I knew that the time in Maui was done. I knew that I had to move on. I knew for me to grow, I had to explore different challenges. And one night I asked for a dream. I said, please give me a dream that I can understand, to know what is my next. And that dream was so clear. I woke up in the morning, and with a super heavy heart, but also knowing that this is what was right, I started my journey to be a landed immigrant here in Canada.
And what kind of helped you? Like, did you settle in Alberta? Where did you choose as to be?
It was
your
Edmonton.
line? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Was that part of your dream, or was there something to it?
No. No. I was in Edmonton. Edmonton had been my kind of entry point into Canada.
Yeah.
You know? And there was something about Edmonton that reminded me of my earliest childhood. A place that, as much as my family life was really lovely, but the place itself I never really liked, and I had always avoided it. And coming to Edmonton, I knew that there was something that wanted to be healed around that. And this was the place that was going to help me do that. There were so many smells, there were so many incidents that brought me right back to this early childhood. And I knew I needed to face that. It was time not to run away from that anymore. And that's why Edmonton was absolutely perfect.
That's really cool, because like Edmonton, I find that it's built a lot of people with really strong character, because you have to be very resilient to live in this city. You have to embrace the cold sometimes, and you have to live by those boxes, those rules, those straight lines kind of thing, because that's just the way this city is wired. It's neat. I'm curious about your experience with Hawaii, because Hawaii is a place that's really close to my heart. I've traveled there only 3 times, but in the times that I went, I slept on beaches, I went camping, I have a tattoo of Hawaii on my shoulder. It's a place where I've learned a ton about myself. I find that every trip that I've made, and I may not have traveled nearly as much, but in every trip that I've done, I've learned an incredible amount about myself and about where my strengths are and about what I am not seeing in perspective. What are your 3 favorite places in Hawaii?
Well, my favorite place by far is Kipahulu, that is where I lived. It's like off the grid, and to this day, this whole little community is still off the grid. And it's quite wild. It's sort of like part of the last bit of rainforest on Maui, and so I really, really, really appreciate it. It's that whole area, Hana to Kipahulu, that I just treasure very, very much. I love the people that are there. It's an interesting mix of people, because on one hand you have, like famous movie stars, like Oprah had a big piece of land there, and I don't think she has anymore. I think she sold it. But Woody Harrelson lives there, and George Harrison lived there, and John Denver, and there was lots of the Beach Boys had land there. So there was lots of very, very wealthy people, and in between were a lot of people that are living hand to mouth, off the grid, on the land, growing their own food, and selling some on farmers markets or things like that. Very, very simple. So it was an interesting, very eclectic kind of community, and I loved being so close to the land. The experience of living off the grid, particularly in this kind of environment, I don't know how well I would fare here in northern Canada, but in this kind of environment, it was a real privilege, because I don't think we even really know anymore how far removed we are from experiencing the earth in that way. And I remember when I first came to Edmonton, one of the hardest things for me was all the sound and the vibration of electricity. I was so not used to it. I felt like I was always with one hand in a socket, and just everything was vibrating. I could not fall asleep because of the vibrating of the refrigerator, even though there was a door in between. I mean, you were so tuned in to the earth in a very, very different way, which now we don't even get. We have microwaves all around, we have internet all around, we have electricity. We're like just plugged into this. And to have the opportunity to experience yourself, mind, body, and heart, in that kind of environment where I felt, I don't want to say like an animal, but yes, like an animal. There is something really animalistic about being so connected in that way. That is, it's very heartfelt. Yeah.
Absolutely. Were there other places that you visited during your stay, or did you kind of keep it towards that one area?
I basically kept it very much to that area. The other place that I really appreciated always was the Big Island.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the Big Island, you know, particularly where the volcano is. But, you know, there's many beaches and lakes and swimming holes that I went to there that now with the last lava flow are completely, have completely disappeared, have completely been filled with lava. I mean, there was one lake that I used to go to. It was private property, but I happened to know the owner, and I knew how to get in there. And it was an incredibly beautiful, beautiful, beautiful lake. And it is now filled with lava. So that's the end of that. But just the energy of the rawness of the Big Island is also something that I really, really loved. And of course, some of the shores in Kauai.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's incredible talking about how like lava has taken over some of the spaces, and even some of the places that I visited something like 3 years ago, like they are not accessible. Like there are guards that are blocking off these areas because it's such a high risk. So memories that I've made, nobody else will be able to legally make those memories. Like, or even just in times since, like there's usually something going on with the terrain there. Like roads are closing, things are happening, things are changing, and it reminds me, like of all the places that I've been, that's probably the one that reminds me the most that life is too short. Go travel, go experience. Having done that and having moved to Edmonton, what are some moments where you have reminded yourself that, hey, life is short, and what did you do in that moment?
That's such an excellent question. Thank you for bringing that up. I could talk a lot about that because that is a memory, or that is a perspective that I take every day. Every day. You know, I feel that's one of the gifts about getting older. You see, because, you know, now in my 60s, I find I get closer to knowing that this body is a very temporary thing. You begin to experience it even. And you go, oh, if this is a temporary thing and it's so close, how can I show up today to make the most out of this gift that was given to me, that is called life, right? And out of this gift, how can I perpetuate health and wellness within myself? How can I feed my brain? How can I nourish my heart? What can I contribute today to make this whole place a better place? Because in, 20, 30 years, I will have to give up this outer shell that houses the spirit. And so time is limited, and time is so incredibly precious. And what joy can I share with the world today? And what joy can I create within myself? Because that's one of the things that I found is something that we don't talk about very much, but I feel that if we each found ways to be joyful inside every day, if that's what we did, no matter how many times we failed, and I fail a lot, but if we could do that, imagine what this world could be like. And if there's nothing else that I want to leave as my legacy, I want to leave joy. And I want to spread as much of that as possible.
I like that. That is something that I wish I could come closer and closer to each day, so it's something that I strive for. What is something that you do in your day that almost guarantees or locks you into that feeling of joy or bringing joy?
Well, dance.
Yeah.
Dancing, for sure, you know? And there was, that was something that I also, for instance, learned at the commune that I lived, because whenever we were working together and people were having challenges and there were interpersonal stuff, a lot of the times everything, the whole job would be stopped. We would put on some music. In those days we still had these cassette recorders. Put on some music and everybody would dance, and you just like shake it out, and then you go, okay, so now let's see what's going on and why, what's happening here. So obviously you can't necessarily do that in every work environment, but in my personal environment, that is still something that I do a lot. Practicing yoga, practicing qigong, I realize, and even looking at the universe outside of us, we see that life is all about movement. So movement is incredibly important. Yeah, and movement, of course, on a physical level, but simply that flow of energy, that unobstructed flow of energy, may that be in our mind, may that be in our heart, may that be in our body. The body is usually the easiest accessible to that, because when you're stuck in your mind with a particular concept or with a belief system, it's much harder to mobilize that. But the body's fairly easy. And a lot of the times when the body starts moving, everything else kind of hopefully can start moving as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a big point to why fitness is such an important part of both of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just a matter of moving. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how that movement happens. It matters that movement happens and that it happens for as long into life as possible because of how important it is. Like, somebody might approach their fitness in a different way than me. Maybe they don't want to do deadlifts, or maybe they don't want to go to an indoor cycling class, or whatever it may be. But if they are moving in some capacity, then that is an amazing thing, because movement is a gift. It can be taken away. Some people don't have that ability to move. But I'm going to segue onto something, because you got me thinking, and you talked about failure and those moments, and I want you to pick out maybe a few moments of failure and what that taught you and what you felt and how you moved forward.
Again, that's a really interesting question. There are so many things in my life that I would probably classify as failure that other people would not. I have a gift, like many people do, to be really quite hard on myself, which over the years that has definitely lessened. But my divorce, that was probably, from my perspective, the biggest failure in my life. I really took that very personally. Like, now looking back, things have shifted. I can take a different perspective. And a big result of the discomfort, the incredible pain that I went through at that time, the incredible disappointment, was that I retreated into my little cabin up in the woods and just, contracted completely. And while that was on some level a real contraction, on the other hand, it was also a very beautiful experience, because I was alone and I had to take care of everything on my own, and when it was cold and snowing outside and I had no heat, and when the water was coming in through my roof, and all these kinds of things, I had to be incredibly resilient. And that, when that survival kicks in, that can be a very powerful way of confronting yourself, and then also hopefully appreciating yourself.
What did that moment teach you about yourself? Like, what strengths did that reveal?
That I am resilient, and that I have enough creativity in order to wiggle myself out of any kind of tight spots. And again, the wiggling, I did a lot of dancing in those days. For some reason I was able to keep my stereo dry and I did a lot of dancing, literally wiggling myself out of that hard spot that I had created for myself internally.
there's a lot of research and talk and literature on the state of flow, that flow state, that place where you find clarity. And is it dance where you find that, or is there something else in your life where you're able to be sort of at peace or embrace the emotion?
Dance is definitely on the forefront, and over the years meditation has become that as well. I've been meditating for many, many years, but it's really only the last few years that I find I'm so settled in that provides me with the information, and it provides me with the resources to take the next step, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, Qigong, yoga, all of those are practices that are somewhat meditative practices. Even, you know, I mean, yoga for me is very, very important, because the breathing aspect of yoga, you know, breath is life. Breath is movement. Good breathing will energize the body and will move things and literally help the body get rid of stuff. And like I said before, the body is one of the easiest things to access, you know, and when things can move there, it can inspire everything else to continue to move.
And that makes sense. And I kind of gave my sort of definition of flow state, but I want to hear it in your words and how you interpret it. So what would be your way of describing flow state to somebody else?
Flow state for me is that place of being settled in my heart in such a way that I know that I can show up for myself kindly and for others with kindness and compassion. And it shows up in a way that whatever comes my way, I can literally dance with it. So dance with it in such a way that I can grow. So as a, let's say, business owner, if challenges come my way, I can be movable enough that I can confront, or dance is a much better word, with those challenges in such a way that there is a constructive and result from that dance. And I can be innovative and creative with the challenges that are being presented. And when that happens, the energy is boundless. You just keep going because you're riding this wave. It's literally like surfing this wave of flow.
That's really well said. So a lot of my audience may not necessarily know where you are at in your life now, what you do, what your description is as a professional, as someone that goes to work and does a job. So I would like you to describe yourself and all the things that you do in your life today.
Well, I'm a business owner, and another thing that I didn't necessarily choose, it chose me. And I own a wellness center, a wellness clinic here in Edmonton. And I personally also practice acupuncture, and I teach yoga, and I teach Qigong. Most of my day is spent, seeing patients, which I absolutely love and adore. I am so grateful that I have the opportunity to provide that kind of space for people to heal. And being a business owner also provides me with an incredible opportunity to share some of my life experiences and share some of my personal views and shall we say insights that have accumulated over the years, and to create a conscious company culture. So it's not just about having a business, but it is about creating a culture where people feel safe to explore themselves, and then as a result of that, be able to provide services to others. So we touch people, not just in a business way, but we touch people in their hearts. And that to me is huge. I only since I've been actually a business owner, and it just kind of, it really just sort of happened. I had no idea what I was stepping into when I said yes to renting the space and, and asking some other people to join me doing massage and facials and Ayurveda and Thai massage and all these different kinds of things, and acupuncture. We started with 6 people, now we're 24. And my influence and my responsibility has only increased with all of that. But it's also become such an incredible source of joy and sometimes challenge to lead some people into deeper trust within themselves and within one another, and to create an environment that is healing for us, and as a result then also healing for the people that it touches. And I am ecstatic that I am able to do that and that I can share that with the world. And I love what I'm learning. It's not always easy. There are many times when I just go home and say, I'm done, I'm quitting, I'm selling, I'm out of here. And then I dance, and then I talk, and then I see that maybe this was just another challenge that I needed to look at, and where I needed to grow and let go and open up yet a little deeper and take perspective and continue to move.
I like that. So looking back at like sort of that self-reflection that you had in Hawaii, and thinking to your first moments living in Edmonton and what that was like, and then fast forwarding to where you are now, what's that perspective or that whole like looking on that timeline like for you? Like what emotions do you feel? What thoughts do you have?
I feel that everything that I have done in Hawaii has truly informed the life that I lead now, because surrendering to the ocean, I don't know if you're an ocean swimmer, but where we lived on Hawaii, it was right at the cliffs. So we had cliffs that this little commune was at. So the way that we got to the ocean is we had to climb down the rocks, and then from the rocks we jumped into the ocean. Then you swim about, and then you have to wait for the right wave to lift you up. You cling onto the rock, and hopefully the water does not pull you down, which then of course would scrape the whole front of your body or whatever, which is not comfortable. So you cling on, and then you climb up, sometimes very, very quickly, depending on what the ocean was like. So it was pretty wild. And in the ocean, a lot of the times you have to surrender. You have to work with the water. You have to let yourself be carried, right? You truly have to surrender, and at the same time find the flow so that you move forward. So that to me was something that myself, to this day, I feel it. To this day, I can close my eyes, and not even have to close my eyes, and know what it looks like after diving in, opening my eyes and seeing the rock formations underwater and where I had to swim through in order to, I see this, and on one hand you're being carried, on the other hand how you're being pulled, how you have to maneuver through that is something that parallels my day every day.
I like that way of comparing the two things and providing that imagery to just life in general. Like for myself, when I went bungee jumping in Costa Rica, that whole jump, I always compare that to my journey into the fitness industry. And yeah, just the experiences that we have in our life are often some of the most encouraging things, or the most concrete things that reaffirm to us that we're gonna be okay, or that we're strong, or whatever it may be. What has been the time in your business ownership that tested you the most?
The first 3 years. The first 3 years were incredibly hard. I had people in my life that were so unbelievably helpful. I cannot even say how grateful I am for people holding my hand, being there, encouraging me, because I had never dealt with staff. I was interviewing people for jobs that I didn't know anything about. How can you interview somebody for something that you don't know anything about? I was hiring some of the right people, some of the wrong people. I did not know how to resolve conflict. I was so, oh my God, I was so stressed. The first 3 years were horrible. I did not know, was I going to make it? Was I not going to make it? Was I going to be able to pay back my debt? How am I going to float this whole thing? What's the purpose of this? And it was about 3 years in, maybe close to 4 years in, that I started actually working with some friends of mine who are business coaches. And when it comes to the business coaching world, they are more in the realm of personal growth. So we started doing some trainings with them, and that really helped me gain perspective. And even though it was not easy for me, because I had to look at things in myself that I didn't even know were challenging, or posed challenges, or that I needed to take a different perspective on some of these things, because this is how it is, and this is how we're going to do this. And working with them has been very, very helpful to move forward. But the first 3 years were incredibly difficult, and I can see how many businesses fold in the first 3-4 years, because it's just very, very hard. I think it's much harder than most people can even imagine, unless you've been in that environment.
That makes sense. And I imagine like the memories of New York and living off $300 and getting food based on cuteness, and that would have helped, hey?
It did. It did. Yeah. And also, because I've lived so much of my life, on one hand, there was a time in California where I went to an accountant and I wanted to pay my taxes, and he looked at what I made and he said, "You're so way below the poverty line. You don't need to pay any taxes." And I'm going, really? Because I never felt poor. I never felt poor, even though there was so many times in my life when I had no money.
Yeah.
Like, a few dollars or $10 or $20 or $60. But I never felt poor. There was always abundance within. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Totally makes sense. Trust me.
And I think it is those experiences that were very helpful for me, because I know how to take a penny and turn it around so many times that penny is spent incredibly wise. Like sometimes I look at how people, even people that, are in my business, how they spend money, and I'm going, I couldn't spend $5 like that. I just couldn't. I mean, it's only $5.
Yeah.
Right? Which now isn't a big deal anymore for me. But I was like, I couldn't even do it. I would feel like, wow, what a waste.
Well, it's like the intention to which you are exercising your resources, and time being a resource, and money being a resource, and effort and intention and like thoughts. All of these things are resources, and you've learned so many ways to spend these things and had these experiences that you have that perspective to see what more a person could do with all of these resources, whether that be paper money or time in their day or thoughts in their head kind of thing.
thoughts in their head, you bring up a very, very good point. I think that's another really important thing for all of us to consider. What are the thoughts that we cultivate in our head? We tend to forget that everything that we eat, but also everything that we think and everything that we feel, literally, it doesn't just inform ourselves, it programs ourselves. We are programming our software every day with what it is that we think. And I feel that is something where we all need to take a stop and go, oh, so what am I thinking? How am I programming myself? Because we're all these huge antennas walking about through life, attracting what it is that we are thinking. And I'm not talking about positive thinking here. I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about necessarily putting on pink glasses, even though I do that a lot. But I'm talking about consciously deciding and consciously cultivating thoughts that nourish us and our environment in the best possible way. Because when we can do that, what a gift. And how can we actually then create a life on this planet that is so much more beneficial for every living creature? We keep forgetting that if the insects die, human beings will die. But for instance, right? If all the trees die, human beings will die.
Yep.
If human beings will die, everything else will start flourishing. So, is there maybe something that in our evolutionary journey we get to look at and go, maybe we can adjust ourselves a little bit here?
Yeah.
Maybe this is, we have resources like our brain and our emotions that the rest of nature doesn't have to this extent, but they're tools. They're actual tools for us, and we don't use them as tools. We become victims of that.
Yep.
So I think we live in very exciting times where the more of us actually get the reality of that, the more we can create truly a difference in this world that will tip the scales, because the scales will have to be tipped if the human race wants to continue.
I agree. And you brought up emotions, and I think honestly that is something that people aren't very, very capable or very skilled with in times of late, like in how social media kind of dictates our emotions, and just it's that whole sheep mentality, like someone goes in one direction and everybody else follows. I think it's hard for people to get in tune with themselves and have that self-awareness of who they are and what they believe in and their core values, because it's so much easier to think that somebody else has it better or that somebody else does it better. What is your best way of sort of exercising your emotions, and how would you allow or enable or encourage somebody else to do the same for themselves?
I think self-reflection is one of the most important things that is really under advertised.
Yeah.
Self-reflection, that and we're so fortunate these days because there are so many tools. There are so many tools that we have. And I feel many of those tools could ideally be started in school already with children, because they still have so much more access to that. They still have so much more connection to what they truly are, because the first 6-7 years, most children, they're not completely here on this planet yet. They're still somewhere in between, and those are incredibly formative years that if we were able to instill that opportunity of getting to know themselves, as silly as this might sound for somebody like 2-year-old or 3-year-old, but encouraging them to stay connected to that bigger thread of their soul while grounding joyfully into this earth, into this particular earth plane, what a different generation we could encourage.
I agree. And like there's so much you talk about kids and they're kind of like they're still coming into themselves sort of thing. And there's so much that a kid can teach an adult.
So much. Yes.
And that's like finding joy in a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or just something different, or these little victories that we get, like a kid walks for the first time and just how happy they are when they realize, well, yeah, I did something that I didn't think I could do and I made it happen. Took a few steps and look at me now, what's next, when do I get to run, kind of thing. We forget to look at life that way. So many times when I've been working with a client that they thought that they were going to be diagnosed with MS. And so they came in to train. And they were like, I want to be able to walk up steps. And so we started with a stool. And at first it's like, you know, they're shaking, like they're having a hard time. And now they're doing it with like a 30-pound dumbbell in each hand. Like 10 steps in a row on each side. Like it's crazy how much a different perspective can change the outcomes of somebody's life. And it's not to say that everybody gets these same chances or these same privileges in life, but to tell yourself that the options are open, like to just give it your best shot and say the right things to yourself in your head makes a huge difference. And you've played a role in a lot of people's lives, I'm sure, being a mentor to many, being a leader to many. Has there been anyone in your life that has acted as a mentor or somebody that has just been a constant in your life for all the different journeys that you've had?
I've had many different mentors, I would say, in my life. I've had the privilege from my, number one, I think my first mentor was my grandmother. She supported me and she held my heart in a way that nobody else did in my childhood. And then later in life, I had the privilege to study with people that only much, much later did I realize how amazing their teachings was and how privileged I was to be able to study with that particular person that 10 years later it was like the person, right? And I feel, I don't know, maybe it was because I always wanted my so much of my internal dialogue was around healing that I attracted those kind of people into my life, that I attracted those kinds of situations into my life, where I ended up studying with that person at that time because that was just the door that opened, very, very, very simply. So when it comes to Chinese medicine, when it comes to dance, when it comes to my spiritual life, I always connected with people that were very, very meaningful. And to this day, I have beautiful friends still all over the world that in different ways are mentors for me.
Yeah.
Not necessarily just in one area, but also in a very humanistic area in my life. I have the privilege of have cultivated friendships where there is so much honesty and support and depth and realness, and realness always comes in when you confront challenging situations, when you are in conflict. And I feel I've been very fortunate to have encountered other people that are willing to share this kind of depth with me.
Mm-hmm. So with meeting different people, because there's so many different situations that come to us in life, and from my perspective, the way I've seen it is you need to kind of find a person that matches your vibrations in life, and you need to have someone that's going to elevate you and not bring you down. I can imagine you've had all kinds of different people that you've encountered, and maybe some people have only spent a short time in your circle, and some people may have lasted a really long time. What is it that stands out to you in a person, or is there anything at all when it comes down to, is this person going to be someone that I want to spend more time with, or that I'll give my time to?
Well, I tend to be drawn to people that have a really open heart. You know, one of the things that I've learned, it was one of my teachers that actually said that, and I know we're talking right now, so I can't, the gesture won't be enough, but he said you can approach any challenge in life by either closing your fist or by opening your hand. And I love people that are able to keep opening their hands, no matter what. And so I keep attracting those kind of people into my life, because they will continue to challenge me as well in the times that you want to close your fist and go, no.
Yeah.
Where you go, what happens when I say yes here? And what does that look like? You know? So those are the people whose relationships have lasted the longest. It's been very interesting. I've had the friend that I've had for the longest time in my life, he and we met when I was 22 in New York, and we have stayed friends since that time. And over the years, when I lived on Maui, for some reason he also lived on Maui, not on the same land. When I went back to Vienna for a short period of time, he happened to live in Sweden. We both lived on the ranch, and now we both live in Edmonton. How odd is that, right?
No kidding.
Yes.
That's crazy.
And on many levels, we are very, very, very different. But we are such good friends. He is one of the deepest heart connections in my life. And we can push each other's buttons, and we can quarrel about things, and we can agree on things, but we continue to encourage each other to grow and to open, and to what happens if we say yes. And that has been, again, a real privilege.
Yeah.
Because even if you know people for that long, a lot of the times, you know, the people that I've hung out with when I was, 17, 18, when I go and visit them in Vienna now and we meet, you know, it's still somewhat superficial. I mean, we don't really have conversations of great depth,
yeah,
and of real growing, because different life situations have led us into different inner places, you know. But this friend, he and I, it's amazing how we have grown in so many ways, so parallel, and continue to have similar realizations about life.
I like that. And I liked your description of closing the hand, opening the hand. When is the time that you came the closest to keeping your hand closed?
After my divorce.
That makes sense.
I did not want that at all. I fought that. I was hanging out in my inner victim, in my little pity party for a long time. I smoked a lot of dope in those days. A lot of dope. Which, you know, it's easy in Big Sur. It was very easy in Big Sur. There was plenty around. But I really had to numb myself in order to just keep going.
Yeah.
You know, and between the beautiful openings, there was also an underlying no. You know, it took a while for that fist to soften and to like myself again.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the hardest things about anything that we perceive as failure. You know, some people say failure is the stepping stones to success. Maybe Maybe that's a way of saying it. I think for me in that time, I don't know if it was a stepping stone. It was an opportunity for me to go within and rediscover myself, because I had given up a lot of what was important to me in order to be in this relationship, which I didn't even realize at the moment.
Yeah, perspective. Like, you don't know
Yes.
until that moment happens.
Yes.
So there's going to be people that listen to this podcast that needed to hear that, and their fist is closed and they're numbing themselves. Like, this is happening. This happens more often than people like to admit. There's
Yes.
probably more than half of my guests have had that moment in their life. And say that they listen to this at the right time, and it's not to say that somebody hears something and they're going to just apply it instantly. But if you could give them a piece of advice on to how to open up their hand again, what would that piece of advice be?
Know that we are all connected. That our hearts, I hope this does not sound corny, but I really do. But we are all so incredibly connected on a heart level, on a soul level, that, you know, if you look at this body through the energetics, our heart chakra is represented by the element of air, through the element of breath. And if you consider that every time I exhale, this is food for the tree that we're looking at. Every time that tree exhales, it is food for me. That is an exchange of love and compassion. And we can actually consciously choose to have our breath be a vehicle of love and compassion, both on the exhale and on the inhale. And so many times when my fist wants to close, that is what I consider. And that is where I can make the choice. And it is only, I know, it is only when I'm open that I can flow. And it is the flowing of the water that is so much stronger than the fist of the rock, because water will wear down rock anytime.
I like that. And it sort of reflects on the power of community and having human interaction in your life, and having these moments where we can sit down and just talk to a person and discuss the things that are important, and not just the little like gossip and banter and things that are not really that meaningful, things like material possessions and stuff. Like, there's more than one person on earth for a pretty good reason, and if we only interact with them through our phone, like we're missing out on a lot. We're missing out on this energy and all these different things that are meaningful. Mm-hmm. With how much you've done in your life to this point, are there things that are kind of on your bucket list, or do you even have a bucket list?
I don't necessarily have a conscious bucket list, but one of the things that I know I want to work with as I get older even is I want to work with death and dying. That is something, that transition, you know, in my own life, I've had two near-death experiences, as they're called. You know, I died at one point in doing an operation. Obviously, they brought me back. And but that moment of transition, I really remember that really strong. And of course, I cannot say that I don't really know anything about death, because it was a matter of a few minutes. It wasn't a matter of, you know, days and then and actually dying. Obviously, none of us really knows that. I mean, maybe some Tibetan lamas know. Maybe there's some spiritual people that actually know. I cannot say that I do know, but I do have a glimpse of something. And I feel that when it comes to death, in our society, we have such a death phobia. And from my perspective, death is the culmination of a life well lived. It is like the final orgasm. And I want to help reframe that. I want to bring such awareness, including into my own life, that when we know it is time to take this shell and give it back to the earth, we are ready to do that in a most gracious way. Maybe even in a much more responsible way that we're doing now. Because now when we are getting challenged and when the bodies get challenged, we place our body into the care of some mechanics that just try to keep it alive, rather than making a conscious decision of saying, I am ready to pass this body on. Very, very consciously. I'm not saying to kill yourself. I'm saying making a decision. And that decision needs incredible awareness and being centered within yourself. And also knowing that this is part of a transition. And we all know that every single living being on this planet goes through this transition. This is not something that we can avoid. You know, it doesn't matter if you become 120 or 180. That's not the point. You know, and being in an age where I can already feel little aspects of the body where you go, oh, that's interesting. How is that not just fixing itself like straight away like that? You know, how do I have to show up? And then saying, yes, of course, this shell needs to be given back to the earth. This gets to be topsoil in a few years, right? So, but we have to understand that, and we have to welcome that. And we have to even love that to such an extent that we maybe even get evolved enough that we can say, okay, it's time now. One of my aunts did that, actually, great aunts did that a couple of years ago. She knew it was time. And, you know, I had not seen her since I was a teenager, because she lives in a place in Europe where I hadn't been since then. And she basically wrote a letter on her kitchen table. She didn't take any substances or anything like that. She sat down, she wrote her goodbye letter. She had the 6 months before that distributed whatever she needed to distribute, and then she sat down and died. I don't know how long it took her, but there was something graceful in that. And I feel the way that we all handle death shows us that we don't really handle life very well. Because life is this privilege, it's a gift. And we have created so much misery with that gift all over the planet. Even in places like these places, which are not ravaged by war. They're not ravaged by famine and, you know, but even within that, we have not found ways of creating an environment that is nurtureful for all of us to live graciously and gratefully, and then die graciously and gratefully. With like, wow, I got to do this.
Yeah.
Thank you. See you later. Next time.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I like that. In that same sense, with someone that has lost someone to cancer or a rare disease or a car accident, like, how do we continue to open our hand and show gratitude in those moments? What is your experience in that? How have you remained resilient in these times? Because I can imagine there's, without a doubt, instances in your life where you've had to face that.
Yes. Well, personally, I know and I know this is a little bit controversial maybe when I say that, but from the perspective of Chinese medicine, Oriental medicine, if you look at the more esoteric aspects of that kind of medicine, they're very deep spiritual roots, and the deep spiritual roots have to do something with the effect that within all the willpower that we have, we are still just part of the flow, and sometimes our soul needs to experience things in just a certain way in order to heal, and everybody else who is alive does not necessarily know what that soul needs to experience. So what we get to do is to be present, incredibly present. And the only way that you can be present with that is to open your hand. Because if the moment you close and say no, it becomes about you. And it does not become about being in support of this other person and holding space for them. Because even when we say, oh, we are so aware that we can welcome death and that we can, be grateful, that doesn't necessarily mean that it cannot be incredibly hard and challenging and painful. And is there a way that we can approach this pain with openness and a willingness to grow and a willingness to hold space for this person that is moving into the next realm, like a goodbye party. And it doesn't have to be a goodbye party with balloons, but it can be a goodbye party with tears that simply wash our souls and that connect us.
I agree. And in a lot of instances, I like to believe that people all have a legacy, and no matter if they're still in their form in human flesh or not, they still have a legacy. And there's so much that you can do with what everyone in your life impacts you with, like in how their energy impacted you and their actions and what held meaning to them, what was their core values. And it's just a matter of remembering that. I think the more people that we really take time to connect with, the more powerful or energized we can be. And sometimes people forget, like, we're interacting, we're coming across a lot of different people in life with a lot of different backgrounds, and your life experience has shown you how to, like your time in New York, the people that had the most compassion for you, the people that fed you, those are different people. Your time in Hawaii, you would have obviously learned to live alongside a lot of different cultures in that area. There's going to be locals that have lived there for many, many years, and from what I can tell, like, you would have found a way to live harmoniously. And it's so neat. We kind of close ourselves off from other people, and I think it's important to be open to all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of life experiences and all kinds of brackets and pay. Like, someone who drives a Range Rover can totally live harmoniously with someone who drives a Pontiac. Like, it's about what we have inside and not what we have outside. But I'm just the young guy giving the advice here. How do you encourage other people to see it this way? Because you've had these experiences, you've lived in these places and done these things, and you get it. How do you try to encourage other people to get it?
That is a challenging question to answer. I feel best through my example.
Yeah.
And, it is so, I feel right now there is such an incredible opportunity for all of us to get this. because, I mean, right now we're nearly 8 billion people on this planet. That is 3 times as many as there were on this planet when I was a teenager. 3 times as many. So it's as if there is, how sometimes in order for a movement to happen, for an avalanche to happen, things have to kind of come together. A lot of things have to come together. And it feels to me like there's a lot of humans right now coming together because there's something that as a collective we want to learn. And I wonder if that realization that we are one is not what we want to learn, which is why all of this is coming together, which is why we have something like the internet. Now, so far the internet has actually not necessarily created harmony, and the reason why it hasn't is because there hasn't been enough focus on our heart space. But I feel that this is the opportunity to connect, to reconnect with that which is the most important, which is our heart space, which is the vibration that is extended through all of our hearts. And so if that may be through meditation, if this is through my teaching, if this is, teaching yoga, or if this is through the way that I work with companies or with in workshops, it is that reminder that when you look at other cultures, it doesn't matter if it's American Indian Native, it doesn't matter if it is Thai or Chinese or Japanese or European Christian, they all have love at the core. They all have heart at the core. And this is an opportunity that with all the technology that we have, for us to find that way, to trust that way of the heart is key. And anybody that comes into my life, including myself, that will be the biggest remembrance that I will offer.
I like that. So there's a question that I ask all of my guests at the end of the episode, and it's if you could give one piece of advice on how to authentically live your life to the fullest, what would that piece of advice be?
Take daily time to reflect and discover what you are. Not who you are, but what you are. Because what we are is so much bigger than any of us can understand.
I like that. This has been an amazing episode. Thank you for giving me your time, sharing your space with me. And how, if somebody wanted to get to know you better, how would they do that? Like, do you write? What's the best way to access you and what you're all about?
Oh, great. Oh, I would love to take some more time in writing. Right now, that hasn't been happening very much. But I teach yoga. I do workshops all over. If somebody wants to have me come into their company and talk about different things, I am very, very available to do those kinds of things. I continue to teach workshops. I do retreats twice a year in a very beautiful place in the Okanagan. So best thing is to follow me on my website, wellnessonwhite.com, white spelled with a Y, and very soon another website, my own personal website, gehagonthier.com, and that's probably the best way to see how I'm sharing in the community and what it is that I do.
Awesome. Amazing. Well, with that, we will end this episode. Thank you.
Thank you.